When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I don't really know why I did that. Maybe because, after all these years, I had no more tears left. Or maybe because I didn't want her to see how much it broke me. It was a quiet morning. The kind that starts with the smell of tea and ends with the sound of a door closing. I was folding my son's old clothes, just a few shirts he'd left behind in the cupboard when he got married. The rain outside made the house feel smaller, colder. I remember touching one of his shirts, the blue one I gave him for his first job interview, and thinking, he doesn't wear this kind of thing anymore. His wife preferred more polished clothes. Expensive ones. When she came into the room that day, her face was calm. But her words weren't. She said, "Amma, I think it's time you go back to the village for a while. You'll be more comfortable there." Her tone was polite, too polite. Like someone rehearsing for a conversation they didn't want to have. I stood there, my hand still resting on the folded shirt. "Is everything all right, Beta?" I asked. She smiled, just slightly. "Of course, Alma. It's just, the house feels a bit crowded. You know, for the baby and all." The baby. My first grandchild. The reason I had stayed longer than I planned. The reason I thought I was needed. I wanted to argue, but my voice refused to come out. So I nodded. "All right," I said softly. "If that's what you want." She looked relieved. That was the hardest part, seeing relief in her eyes when she knew I'd agreed to leave. That afternoon, I packed my small suitcase. The rain kept falling, whispering against the window like an old friend trying to comfort me. My son didn't come home until evening. By then, I was already waiting near the door, my bag beside me. He looked surprised. "Ma, what's going on?" "Your wife thinks I need some rest," I said with a small smile. "She's probably right." He frowned, then looked toward the bedroom where she was. I could see the conflict in his eyes, but he said nothing. Just silence. That kind of silence that says everything. When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet earth and jasmine. I walked to the gate slowly, feeling the weight of years behind me, years of raising him, of believing love never changes. And as I turned back one last time, I saw her standing at the door. She didn't wave. She just closed it, quietly, gently, completely. Before all of this, my life was simple. I lived in a small house on the edge of town, surrounded by mango trees and neighbors who always waved when they passed by. My days were filled with small routines: making tea at dawn, watering the plants, and waiting for my son, Rohan, to come home from work. He was the kind of boy who always smiled when he entered a room. Not loud or demanding, just kind. The kind of son every mother prays for. His father had passed away when Rohan was only 8 years old, so it had always been just the two of us. He used to say, "Ma, one day I'll give you a life where you don't have to worry about anything." I would laugh and tell him, "I don't need anything but you." For years, it was just that, him and me. We were a team. I worked part-time at a local school, and he studied hard, determined to build a better future. I remember those evenings when we would sit together on the veranda, sharing a simple meal and talking about everything: his dreams, his fears, and the small things that made him happy. When he got his first job in the city, I was so proud. He called me from the bus stop, his voice trembling with excitement. "Ma, they chose me. I got it." I cried that day. Not because of the job, but because I could finally see his father's promise living through him. After a few months, Rohan asked me to move with him to the city. "I can't leave you alone there," he said. I hesitated at first. I had my home, my garden, my memories, but the thought of being near him was enough. So I packed up everything we owned into 2 large trunks and followed him. The city was loud, busy, and full of people rushing somewhere. But Rohan made sure I was comfortable. He rented a small apartment, and every evening he'd sit with me, telling stories from work, laughing, making sure I ate well. I used to tell him, "Beta, you'll find a good girl soon. Then my job will be done." He'd blush and say, "Ma, you'll always be my first lady." Then one day, he brought her home in EHA. She was beautiful, confident, and spoke with a sweetness that made me like her instantly. She wore her hair neatly tied, her eyes full of warmth when she looked at him. "Auntie," she said softly, "Rohan talks about you all the time." I smiled. "That's because he's my whole world," I replied. From the beginning, I tried to make her feel like a daughter. I cooked her favorite dishes, gave her small gifts, and told her stories from Rohan's childhood. She laughed and called me Amma even before the wedding. I thought I had gained another child that day. Their wedding was simple, but full of love. Rohan looked so happy standing beside her. I still remember how he held her hand during the ceremony and glanced at me with tears in his eyes as if to say, "Ma, I kept my promise. You're not alone anymore." After the wedding, we all lived together in that small apartment. At first, it was perfect. Mornings were filled with the sound of laughter and the smell of parathas cooking in the kitchen. We'd sit together for breakfast. Neha always made sure I had my tea just the way I liked it. I used to think, how lucky I am. My son found someone who loves him and respects me too. But little by little, things began to change. It started with small silences. Neha would sometimes avoid my eyes when I spoke. She began taking longer to answer me or would correct the way I did small things in the kitchen. "Amma, maybe you should rest." "I'll handle the cooking," she'd say with a polite smile. I thought she was being caring. But soon, she started cooking separately for herself and Rohan. Saying our food habits were different. At first, I didn't mind. I told myself this is how new relationships work. Everyone needs time. But then, there were small whispers. I wasn't supposed to hear her talking on the phone. Saying things like, "He's too attached to his mother," or "She doesn't understand city life." I told myself not to take it personally. I prayed every night for understanding, for peace in our home. Then came the first argument between Rohan and Neha. I was sitting in the living room when I heard her say, "You can't make every decision after asking your mother." Her voice was low but sharp. I froze, not wanting to make it worse. Rohan tried to calm her, saying, "She's my mother. I just want her to feel included." That night, when I brought them tea, Neha's eyes were red. I placed the cups down quietly and said, "Everything all right, Beta?" She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Amma, just a small misunderstanding." But misunderstandings have a way of growing roots if you don't pull them out. After that, Rohan spent longer hours at work and Neha stopped joining me for evening tea. I tried to bridge the gap by helping her around the house, but she would often say, "Amma, I've got it. You should rest." Her words were kind, but her tone distant. One evening, as I was folding clothes in the bedroom, I overheard her on the phone again. "I just want my own space," she said. "I can't live like this anymore. His mother is always around." My hands trembled, holding his shirt, the same blue one. For the first time, I realized I was slowly becoming an outsider in my own home. Still, I kept smiling. I thought love and patience could heal anything. I began writing small notes for Neha, little reminders like, "Don't forget your umbrella," or "I made your favorite curry." She never mentioned them, but I saw her reading them sometimes. I took that as a small sign of hope. And when she told me she was expecting, my heart filled with joy. I hugged her tightly, and for a moment, she hugged me back. I thought, maybe now we'll be a family again. I started knitting baby clothes and planning meals for her. Rohan was happier than ever. He'd place his hand on her belly and say, "Ma, soon you'll have someone else to love." I laughed, but inside, I prayed that love would bring us closer, not push me further away. Those months were quiet, peaceful, almost. But beneath that calm, something fragile was breaking. I could feel it. In the way Neha moved around me, and how my son spoke less when I was in the room. The rain that afternoon wasn't just outside, it felt like it had seeped into the walls, into our hearts. The house that once echoed with laughter now echoed with silence. Rohan had started coming home later and later. He said it was because of work, but I knew better. He didn't want to come home to the tension. And Neha, she had grown quiet too. She rarely spoke to me, and when she did, her voice carried a kind of politeness that cut deeper than anger. Still, I tried. Every morning, I made tea for the three of us. I'd place their cups on the table and wait. Sometimes they drank it. Sometimes they didn't. On those mornings, I'd pour the cold tea down the sink and tell myself, maybe tomorrow will be better. But tomorrow didn't come. When Neha's pregnancy entered its 7th month, she began staying mostly in her room. I offered to help her with the baby preparations, but she refused gently every time. "It's okay, Amma. I've already ordered everything online," she'd say, her eyes never quite meeting mine. I missed the old days, the laughter, the small talks, even her asking me for recipes. Now it felt like there was an invisible wall between us, and no matter how many times I knocked, she wouldn't open the door. One evening, I heard them talking behind closed doors. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the walls in that house carried sound easily. Neha's voice was tired but firm. "Rohan, we need our own space. Every couple does. I can't raise our child like this. Your mother means well, but I feel like I can't breathe." There was a long silence, then Rohan's voice soft, uncertain. "She's my mother, Neha. She's all I have." "I'm not asking you to abandon her," Neha said, her tone lowering. "Just, maybe she can go back to the village for a while. At least until the baby comes." I froze. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the rest. When I walked away from the door that night, my feet felt heavier than my heart. I wanted to pretend I hadn't heard, but her words stayed with me. Go back to the village. That night, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain hit the glass. Every drop sounded like a memory, a small reminder of how things used to be. The next morning, I made breakfast like always. Neha came out of the bedroom looking tired. I smiled and said, "I made your favorite upma." She nodded but didn't sit down. "Thank you, Amma. I'm not very hungry." Rohan was leaving for work, rushing as usual. He kissed Neha on the forehead, then turned to me. "Ma, I might be late again tonight. Don't wait for dinner." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Take care, Beta." After they left, I sat alone at the dining table, staring at the 2 untouched cups of tea. The house was quiet, too quiet. I reached for the baby sweater I had been knitting and tried to distract myself, but my hands trembled. Every stitch felt heavier. In the evenings, I started sitting on the balcony again, watching people pass by below. Sometimes I saw older women walking with their daughters-in-law, laughing together, carrying bags from the market. I wondered what I had done wrong. Had I been too loving? Too present? One day, my neighbor, Mrs. Mehta, came to visit. She was a kind lady, always cheerful. "You don't come out much these days," she said. "Everything all right?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, just. The baby's coming soon. Things are busy." She nodded but looked at me with the kind of understanding only another mother can have. "Sometimes," she said softly, "we give everything and still it's not enough." After she left, I sat quietly for a long time. Her words echoed in my head. A few weeks later, the baby arrived, a beautiful boy. My grandson. When I first held him, I felt something light up inside me again. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and I whispered, "You're my little miracle." For a few weeks, the house felt alive again. I helped with feedings, changed diapers, sang lullabies. Neha seemed tired but content. She even smiled at me once when I rocked the baby to sleep. But slowly, that warmth faded again. Neha started insisting on doing everything herself. "Amma, please don't lift him. You'll strain your back." "Amma, I've got this." "Amma, please rest." Her words were always kind, but they built walls all the same. Then, one afternoon, while I was folding baby clothes, I overheard her talking on the phone again. "I told him already," she said sharply. "His mother is sweet, but this isn't working. I can't raise my child under her shadow." I sat frozen, holding the tiny socks in my hands. They felt lighter than air. That evening, when Rohan came home, I decided to talk to him. I didn't want to interfere, but the pain inside me had grown too heavy. "Beta," I said softly as he sat down tired from work. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" He nodded, his eyes weary. "Of course, Ma. What is it?" I hesitated. I hope I'm not making things difficult. I know Neha feels uncomfortable sometimes." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Ma, it's not like that. She just needs time. Things will settle. Do you think maybe I should go back to the village for a few weeks?" I asked quietly. He looked startled. "No, Ma. Why would you say that?" I smiled weakly, because I heard her say it. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Rohan looked down, his hands clasped together. "She didn't mean it that way," he finally said. "She just feels pressured. I'll talk to her." But he never did. Or if he did, it didn't help. Days turned into weeks. The baby grew fast, and with every new milestone, I felt a little further away from them both. They started going out together, just the three of them, and sometimes came back late. I would wait by the window, pretending to read, pretending not to care. One evening, I made kheer. It was Rohan's favorite since childhood. I waited for them to come home, the pot still warm on the stove. When they finally arrived, I said cheerfully, "I made something special." Neha smiled politely. "That's sweet, Amma, but we already ate." The pot of kheer sat untouched until midnight. I poured it out the next morning, the smell of wasted milk filling the kitchen. That day, something in me began to accept what I had been denying. Love alone cannot hold a home together. The small gestures I made folding laundry, cooking meals, tidying the living room became invisible. They passed me in the hallway without noticing. I began spending most of my time in my room, knitting, writing letters I never sent, and watching old photos on my phone. Then one morning, it happened. Neha approached me in the living room, her face calm, her tone almost rehearsed. "Amma, can we talk for a moment?" I looked up, sensing something in her voice. "Of course, Beta." She sat across from me, her hands clasped together. "I've been thinking. Maybe you should go to the village for a few months. Just until the baby grows a little. You'll be more comfortable there." For a moment, I just stared at her. I wanted to ask, what about me being here? What about family? But the words didn't come. Instead, I smiled. "If that's what you think is best." She looked relieved. "Thank you, Amma. I know it's hard, but this will be good for everyone." That night, I sat in my room, looking at the suitcase I had once used to come to the city. It was old now, the corners worn. I began folding my clothes slowly, one by one. The smell of detergent and rain mixed in the air. When Rohan came home, he looked confused. "Ma, what's going on?" "Neha thinks I should rest in the village for a while," I said quietly. He looked at her, then at me. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the helplessness of a man caught between two loves. "Ma," he began, but I stopped him. "It's all right, Beta. I understand." He said nothing. The next morning I woke up early, made tea for both of them, and placed it on the table. They were still asleep. I didn't wake them. I sat by the window, watching the rain again, remembering all the years that had brought us here. When the taxi came, I picked up my suitcase. Rohan helped carry it to the door. I could feel his guilt, his silence, his love all tangled together. At the door, Neha stood quietly, holding the baby. I smiled at him, kissed his tiny forehead, and whispered, "Be good, little one. Always love your parents." When I looked up, Neha's eyes met mine for a second. I wanted to say something kind, something motherly. But before I could, she gently stepped back and closed the door. The soft sound of a latch. A pause, then only rain. That was the moment everything changed. Not loudly, not with anger, just with silence. When the train began to move, I looked out the window, watching the city shrink behind me. The tall buildings blurred into gray shapes, the streets fading beneath the rain. I held my old handbag close and rested my head against the glass. The reflection staring back at me looked tired, older somehow. But there was a quiet strength in those eyes, too. The journey to my village took nearly 6 hours. I spent most of it thinking, not crying, not angry, just thinking. About Rohan, about Neha, about how love changes shape with time. I remembered the day I left that same village with my son, full of hope. Back then, I had told myself that city life would give him more than I ever could. And it did, just not in the way I imagined. When the train finally stopped, my cousin Ravi was waiting at the station. He was surprised to see me alone. "Bobby, you didn't tell us you were coming." I smiled faintly. "It was a sudden decision," I said. He took my suitcase and walked me to his small car. As we drove through the narrow lanes of the village, the smell of wet earth filled the air. The fields were green after the rain. Children ran barefoot through puddles. It felt both familiar and distant, like stepping into an old photograph. When we reached my house, the same one I'd left years ago, I felt my chest tighten. The garden was overgrown, the paint faded, but it was still home. Ravi helped me settle in and said, "You should have called. We'd have cleaned everything up." "It's all right," I replied softly. "I'll do it myself. I need the work." That evening, I opened all the windows. The air smelled of dust and memories. I made myself a cup of tea, sat on the old veranda, and watched the sunset turn the sky orange. For the first time in months, the silence felt gentle, not heavy. The next few days passed slowly. I cleaned every corner of the house, one room at a time. I found Rohan's childhood toys, his school medals, and the small wooden frame with our photo, the one taken on his first day of college. I wiped the dust off and placed it by my bedside. Each morning, I cooked simple meals and walked to the market for vegetables. The shopkeeper, an old friend, recognized me instantly. "You've come back for good?" he asked. I hesitated. "For a while," I said. In the evenings, I would sit outside, listening to the crickets and thinking about the baby. I wondered how big he'd grown, what he looked like when he smiled, whether he had Rohan's eyes or Neha's. Sometimes, I caught myself talking to the stars as if they could carry my words to him. "Your grandma misses you," I'd whisper softly. But as peaceful as the days were, the nights were long. I'd wake up at odd hours, thinking I heard Rohan calling, only to find the house quiet. I missed his footsteps, the sound of him laughing in the kitchen, the way he'd call out, "Ma, where's my wallet?" It's strange how,